Hi friends. In our practice today, I'm going to take you through a short session which will help you reestablish a more balanced pattern for your hips, your pelvis and low back, the connection to our shoulders and the correlation to what's happening in hips, how it translates to shoulders, but also how it runs up into the neck. So we're going to go through about 5 or 6 movements here, and each one will do a few repetitions. Now the rules that I want you to keep in mind as you move through this is nothing should hurt. If you're starting to go into a movement and you experience a muscle spasm or a whole lot of tightness, I want you to back off a whole lot. You can even imagine the movements rather than do them. So as you go into our pandiculations, creating tension and slowly releasing, you're learning to reestablish control over those hypertonic muscles. So this is what it looks like. Go ahead and take a moment to lie down on your back. And as you settle in, if your low back is tight, I suggest you keep your knees bent and your feet flat. If you're comfortable straightening out your legs, you're just going to let your legs straighten and take a few breaths. And so as you settle in, I want you to notice how are your legs positioned, right? So are they rolled out or in? Is there a bend? Are they straight? How much space between the back of your knees and the floor? And then also notice hips. Are your hips level? Does one hip bone feel like it's higher? Does the back of one hip feel like it's sunk or heavier on the floor? Keep following up through your low back. So if there's a whole lot of space in that natural curve of your low back, notice that. Is there more tension on the right or the left side of your spine? Following to your ribs, same idea. Sink versus lift. Following through your shoulder blades. See if you can feel your actual shoulder bone touching the floor, or if there's more of a rotation toward the outside of your ribs or more of a roll forward through your shoulders. And then following down here, arms. Palms turning up, turning down, touching on your pinky or your index finger. Just kind of noticing. So that means there's going to be some differences right to left. And maybe you have an idea of how things connect there. Continuing up past your shoulders into your neck, notice if your head is straight or if there's a rotation. And with your neck, there's either going to be a rotation to a side or a tuck of your chin in or back. So notice those things. And this is just kind of your running checklist from practice to practice, but also at the beginning and the end of your practice. It builds your proprio and interoception. It builds your proprio and interoception, the understanding you have of the space that you occupy and what's happening on the inside. And that's going to help you to learn how to release tension. So from here, here's your first movement. Take a breath in. As you exhale, press your low back flat into the floor, and then slowly let that tension go and let yourself rest. You'll completely relax before you move into your next repetition. Do it again. Press your back flat, slowly let that tension go and rest. And if you're able to, I suggest that you try these movements without watching the video. So see if you can find the movements on your own, and if you can't, you can always watch and come back to it. One more time, pressing your back flat, slowly releasing that tension to rest. Now move your pelvis in the opposite direction. So you're drawing your tailbone down, your hips are lifting away from the floor. It's a bit of an arch to your low back. You'll notice the muscles on either side of your spine behind you start to tighten, and then you slowly release that tension and allow yourself to relax. And you'll move into that twice more. So I'm not lifting my butt, I'm just lifting my back away from the floor and slowly releasing down. For some of us, it helps to think of lifting your belly up and slowly softening that tension back to the floor. So from here, remember when I asked you to notice, was one hip heavier, one higher? If there's one hip that feels like it's lifted toward the ceiling, that's going to be your first tip. If alternately you have more awareness of one hip feeling heavier, the heavier hip is your second and the opposite hip is your first. And if you don't have any awareness, pick one. So lift hip number 1 toward the ceiling. That means hip number 2 presses down. Notice what your legs and your pelvis do. Slowly release that tension and relax. Do that 2 more times. Press your first hip up, press your second hip down. Slowly release and rest. Take a breath in, and on your exhale, do it 1 more time. And as you let that tension go, allow yourself to soften back to the floor. Now, some things to think about. There's first or primary movers, there's secondary and tertiary movers for any movement. And sometimes our muscles get so habituated that they check out. So I want you to explore how big, how small do you need to make the movement to make it worthwhile for you. So sometimes tiny movements are important, and sometimes really big, strong, aggressive movements help. Go to your second side, lift your second hip, your first hip presses down, and then you slowly release your hip back to the floor and allow yourself to relax. Can you tell if the movement's initiated in the same way? So find your lift and your sink, and you slowly release and rest. And I want you to notice things like, how does the rest of your body move in kind of response to what you're creating in your pelvis? Slowly let that tension go and rest. And now check to see how your shoulder blades connect with the floor. So same idea as through your hips. If one shoulder feels heavier and one is lifted, heavier shoulder is 1, lifted 1 is 2. Press your first shoulder down into the floor and let that tension go. Do it again. First shoulder down and slowly release. Now press your second shoulder into the floor and slowly let that go. And do that again. Second shoulder presses down. Slowly let that go. We're going to take this movement into a little bit of a twist, an oppositional twist through your legs and your torso. Arms come toward the ceiling and palms touch. Try not to let your hands slide. So imagine there's glue on your palms and they can't separate. You also can't bend your elbows. So from here, bring your legs to touch, so knees and ankles touch. Turn whichever side makes more sense to turn to. Turn your torso to that side. So you're going to rotate your upper body as far as you can go and twist your lower body in the opposite direction. On your inhale, come back. So you're going to do that 2 more times. Turn your upper body to one side, turn your legs in the opposite direction. Inhale as you come back. Rest. Do it 1 more time. And rest. And now go in the opposite direction. Turn and twist your legs away. Bring yourself back and relax. Do it again. Rest each time before you go into your next movement. And just notice, does your range increase or decrease? When you finish this, let your hands come down. Separate your knees and feet hips distance. We're going to do 1 more movement here. Hands come behind your head. You can interlace your fingers or overlap your hands. Move into your arch. Slowly release your arch. Press your back flat. Just hover your head away from the floor. Just hint at your elbows coming in. Pressing your back flat, just hint at your feet coming away from the ground. And now slowly release all of this tension and rest. For some of us, that foot lift is going to be too much. And for some of us, we might want to make it a little bit bigger. So you have to play with it. And everything comes down to touch the floor at the same time. So you'll do that twice more. Inhale, arch your back, maybe even press your elbows down, and maybe even tip your chin and look back in space. Slowly release that. Pressing your back flat, elbow and head lift, tuck your chin, so feel everything in the front tighten. Maybe your feet lift. And then slowly release so that everything comes down and relaxes. Take a breath in and out. And do it 1 more time. Arch. Slowly release your arch. Press your back flat. Lift your head. Maybe your feet lift. And then release as slow as you're able so that your head, your hands, your elbows, your feet, everything touch at about the same time. Once you're down, bring your hands to rest beside you. If you're comfortable straightening your legs, go there. Just kind of check in, just like we began, how your heels connected. How about the space between the back of your knees and the floor? Are your hips level? Have you released some of that lift away from your low back and the ground? Are your bottom ribs touching? Are your shoulder bones or blades level with the ground? And is your neck still turned to one side, or are you facing the ceiling a little more squarely? Take a few breaths and allow yourself to gently come up to a seated position, either rolling off to one side or rocking up to your seated position. Play around with these movements. If you do a few of these a few times a week, I guarantee you'll start to see some change in the resting level of tension in your body. And this helps with any movement practice. So it will help you to increase your range.